Hello, welcome back to another episode of Examining the Witness. As promised, we're going to be talking about the civilizational history of the island, the people who came to the island, what they did, and kind of what each civilization stands for in the story of the game, because they all have, you know, their own... Like the last time we were talking about the architecture firm and all these fun little details and stuff, but you know, the Witness is about more than just like a game like Dishonored or something, which has a really thought through world, and they make sure that each area has like multiple layers of history and stuff. The Witness is doing that, but it's also doing that with like a philosophical purpose in mind. So each civilization has its own ideas and kind of contributes to the development of things and of the game's themes. So we're going to talk about that today, and it's going to be cool.
Would you say that the Witness is considering this part of like the Great Conversation, or do you think that it has like another interpretation of like how philosophy is developed?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely... So one of the things that's interesting about the this like civilizational thread, which is an underappreciated part of the story, right? Because when people think story, they think like audio logs and stuff, and this isn't about that. It's I mean, you know, it's all told wordlessly. You know, it's just environmental storytelling, and it's not environmental storytelling like, oh, there's the skeleton of the guy who shot the other guy, you know. But it's still a really important part of the story, even though, yeah. So the story of the game is like the audio logs. Then there's like the VR meta story, which we'll talk about. But it's like the game has layers, and we'll talk about that. But yeah, I think one of the things that the civilizational theme contributes is a real picture, a more political picture, and just a more big picture about like humanity and like the sweep of history and like our place in the world. So like the Witness is about this kind of striving for some kind of transcendent unifying knowledge, and it wants to unify all these different ways of knowing about the world, right? Most notably, it wants to bring together kind of like meditative first-person conscious experience, and kind of like solve the hard problem of consciousness by like somehow finding a way to bridge this seemingly unbridgeable gap between like the first person experience of like qualia and stuff, and the like, you know, sort of third person experience of science and physics and just everyday objects and knowledge that builds up on itself and can be used to make tools, and kind of all that's all our kind of mechanistic understanding of the physical world versus like the kind of mystery but also like imminent everyday reality of the kind of mental world. So it wants to tie that together. It wants to tie together all these different branches of science, and you know, that gives the game this open world theme of like all of the different you know, all the different zones getting tied together with lasers. But that can seem like a very personal quest. And like, for instance, certainly in Braid, it's a very personal quest. It's just like Tim. He's like obsessive. He's going out. He's solving puzzles. He's trying to build the atom bomb. And it's like this. It's like enlightenment or bust for me personally. Is Tim's quest in Braid versus the Witness is more, I don't know, I guess like chilled out, and more resigned to the fact, I guess, that like you probably won't get enlightenment all in one shot yourself.
Yeah, it's not actually a quest quite like a quest.
Yeah. So this, you know, playing all the puzzles, it's a single player experience, right? Like you're the only person on this island, and even the VR meta story is like, oh, we made this game as like a kind of VR tool for people to become enlightened by like, or like just develop a real strong affinity for circles, by like putting themselves in a coma, and then they do this trial run, like they're playing the Talos Principle over and over until they finally understand what's going on or something. But then there's all these themes in the audio logs that are all about like, what should we do as a society, or like what's the right course, or like there's all these people up at the top of the mountain that are like illustrating the different reactions that people can have towards the idea of like some ultimate final knowledge or some kind of transcendent mega project or something like that. So having the fact that it's telling this civilizational story through a location, right? And that's a very unique thing to video games. Like movies tell stories through characters, books tell stories kind of through characters and kind of through the internal narration and stuff like that. But video games can really tell stories through places. And so having this place that has all this sort of diversity to it emphasizes the message that like there are a lot of different perspectives. Like there's the religious characters, and then there's the scientific materialist characters, and there's like Zen people from like, the 1200s or whatever, and then there's like people from the 20th century and from the modern day. So I think the civilizational thread is like really helps emphasize that this is like not just one idiosyncratic like quest for truth as a person, but it's it's like kind of the purpose of mankind or something. It's not just like an arbitrary interest. It's like a mystery that we're all concerned with. I don't know, it just brings it to that big scale. And it also paints a little bit of the real life story of humanity's kind of dawning knowledge, and the ways that the world was understood and the questions that people asked and things like that. So anyway, I think it's important for all those reasons. I think it's an important like layer of story. Like The Witness has all these different layers, and in one you're just like, oh, I'm a Myst guy. Like I woke up on the island and
I'm gonna get off this island after I
exactly. I'm gonna solve a bunch of puzzles. Like why am I here? Like that kind of thing. That's sort of the most obvious story. Then you have like the VR meta story is like another layer, which I call it the meta story because it's very meta in terms of it's like we're game developers, and it's deliberately blurring the lines between the fictional development of some sort of consciousness promoting experimental like technology
super
for
game.
Advancing people's wellness, sort of like futuristic sci-fi super game, versus the actual development of the actual witness. Like they have the audio log where they're like talking about recording themselves doing a conversation, and it's like, wait, like is this an actual conversation that they then transcribed and paid voice actors to do, So anyways, there's like a lot of different layers of story, and the civilizational story also kind of ties into the meta story in a way that we'll get to in the end in some kind of crazy sci-fi ways. But we got to start where it all begins. But we won't spend too much time here, out in the desert, because that is where it starts. And then we get to giant, crazy flying hotels and stuff later. This
just is disappointing. Like these people tried to understand like the true nature of reality, and it ends in hotels.
Yeah, yeah. So, in my last video, I talked about that awesome blog post from the architecture studio that worked on The Witness, and they also have primary material on brainstorming the civilizational stages. So it is canon that there were 3 phases of civilization in The Witness. Actually, there's kind of 4 because the industrial civilization then becomes like a sci-fi future civilization. But it's canon that there's 3 civilizations, like stages of civilization in the game that they wanted to represent. And they wanted to have this multi-layered approach. And you can see from a lot of some of the concept art in the mountain and stuff, we could put up images here possibly, or just like the discussion on like Luis's Art of the Witness blog, or just evident in different parts of the world. They wanted a lot of things to be multi-layered, like buildings being reused, or like being able to see the ruins of previous things. But anyway, so it's cool to have the architecture bit to just kind of confirm some of the things that are in the design of the game. And I will read to you guys from the description of each level of civilization. So this first ancient sun-worshipping people, they say, though little evidence remains, There appears to have been a technologically primitive yet complex society founded upon the worship of ancestral and geographical deities on the island. Evidence of a settlement is found at the watercourse divergence at the center of the island. There is also evidence of an adjacent grazing pasture for limited domesticated animals. Their primary source of nutrition came from 2 highly productive fishing bays on either end of the island. The economic axis between these 2 bays lay perpendicular to a spiritual axis that led from the volcanic crater to an aberrant lava rock on the other side of the island, both of which contain evidence of spiritual activities and numerous tomb sites. So this is like an early draft of things when the story was more volcano focused, and also when the town as a gameplay area only came together very late. It was like one of the last areas of the game, or at least of the surface island, to be completed. So the town used to be like more of a ruin. But yeah, the 2 bays that they're talking about, I mean, we should probably just like put up a picture or go over to the boat or something. But we have the harbor bay on this side, and then we have, I guess they're probably talking about the marsh over there, the kind of marsh mangrove area. Yeah, and they have some like ecological succession drawings also in the mountain, like showing how certain areas like the marsh might like get filled in over time, and you know, trees and stuff. So basically what they're saying is these are like this is like early cities, right? This is supposed to be kind of like recapitulating on the island the history of like human civilization, right? So this is your kind of like Stonehenge type thing. It's all lined up with the sun. It's like a kind of pyramid style like astronomy temple thing. It's not like a market square or something, you know. Maybe there was more town around it, like there's all these little ruins of walls and stuff. But so they're saying the spiritual axis is like going, well, it's still here. It's this line here, right, that like or maybe not quite. This goes over to the theater area, and then I guess the real spiritual axis they were drawing was to the mountain over here, because they had some sort of mountain worship early on. Nowadays, you can't really find anything to support the idea that they held the mountain in particularly high regard, except maybe this line, but that seems to be shooting off to the side. They're really big into the sun, obviously.
Isn't on the temple those little triangles? Is that the temple itself, or is that the mountain?
Yeah, this is the temple itself, I think. So like, if you take a look at it, it has these 3 doors, and it has steps. Okay. You know, I mean, it just looks like this. It's like a little meta version. You know, and I talk about this in great detail in the 4th. This is back in my original run of episodes, when I foolishly comboed videos, even though they would get super long. Talked about this area and also the Feynman video. And yeah, so these people are really into like representation. Like they're like, oh, it's the sun, but it's also reflecting the literal sun, and then also this is like a picture of reflection, but then actually there's like literal reflection that also happens like off of these things somehow. If I can get into the right, yeah, there we go. So, you know, there's all sorts of clever stuff like that. And here it's portraying like the sun. You see there used to be a bunch of other panels up here to represent the sun at different angles and how the light would hit and stuff like that. So it's just trying to communicate solar reflection. So anyways, the people had a kind of like obsessive interest in like metaphor and meaning and representation. It almost strikes me, I mean,
but it's literal, but it's representation.
Yeah, it's kind of like, it's like when I go to the museum with like Sumerian tablets and stuff, and it's like, I'm just thinking like these people must have been like tripping out when they were like inventing language. I mean, they weren't actually, because language developed painfully slowly over hundreds of years and stuff. But
there were
still,
moments in certain
yeah, exactly.
just,
You'd be like,
struck.
whoa, like, you know, I put these 3 beads to represent 3 sheep on the outside, and then I put this stamp on the outside to represent the number of sheep, which can be confirmed by cracking open the tablet to get the beads. And, you know, like, I don't know. There's just, it's like the stirrings of consciousness. It's like your first. Or like when people, it's less about the experience of the people themselves. It's almost more the archaeological experience, right? Like when we dig up like ancient figurines of Venus or something, or even like rocks that have like just kind of geometric crisscross patterns etched into them by like Neanderthals or, you know, people living in Europe like 30,000 years ago or something. We're like, wow, like this shows that they were like thinking of abstract thought. Like we'll find just like some zigzags carved into a rock and be like, wow, like somebody was they're thinking about a pattern. We never see chimpanzees.
Maps,
yeah, like chimpanzees don't do like cool crosshatch patterns. You know, like people who think about math and stuff do that. So anyways, I talk all about the civilization in that earlier episode and kind of what they seem to stand for. So they're all, it's kind of like this dawning of consciousness, but I guess to talk more about their literal, you know, the
contribution.
Yeah, like how the civilization worked and stuff. So this is kind of like a Stonehenge type sun worshipping holy site, probably surrounded by other buildings. So these are like pretending to be like astronomy measuring things, like this Jantar Mantar observatory in India, or like the Mayan observatories, you know, just this kind of curving thing. Of course, really it's meant to reflect the sun and be an environmental puzzle, so like, for that reason it's like not lined up properly to do astronomy. You'd want it all to be lined up at like the, you know, the North Pole or something, and not lined up pointing towards the sun, which is just going to move, of course, the rest of the day. You know, but this is like, it's just the classic association of like ancient peoples doing astronomy and trying to understand the natural world and stuff. This is another like crazy representation one where it's like you get this environmental puzzle when you're down on the boat and you're looking at the glint of the sun reflect across this thing and make the shape. And then when you come up here, there's a picture of a boat on waves, and then here's the actual sun with the little Tekla logo. Like this is the same logo that shows up in the little hotel area. Yeah. And then look, this is the actual thing. Like this is the cliffs, and this is you're staring at, and that's the reflection of the sun. So it's like, oh, the representation of the thing is like a lesser version of the thing. But of course, this whole scene is like a representation of the actual scene of the sun glinting off the thing. So anyways, they're just tripping out on metaphors over here. Big into sun worship, which we'll talk about later. So this is a religious site / like temple, kind of Egypt style, with the multiple layers and the false ceilings, and you know, the burying the king and thinking about the afterlife and immortality and stuff. We have these little ruins around the outside, which the little squares kind of suggest like maybe these were like little houses, or you know, just like ordinary buildings kind of clustered around the big stuff. And that's most of what's left behind of this civilization. So they have this underground thing, which we're at the beginning of the video, this long little passageway with little like air tunnels dug for architectural realism and light, I guess, and to like let the smoke out from torches and things. And interestingly, the underground people also constructed the theater area. Where the hell is the hole here? Yeah. So they built this. It's built in their same kind of like sandstony brick architecture. Obviously, it's been retrofitted now to be used as a theater, but I'm pretty convinced because it lines up with, where's that? Yeah. So it perfectly lines up with this this little beam here, which obviously the laser beam is just sent by the people, but you saw how the laser beam lined up with the underground.
Oh, it did.
Yeah. So this is like illustrating the path of the underground channel. If we can get up there, whatever. You'll have to rewind the video or take it on faith. And then another thing on the Architects blog, they talked about how this windmill was like a sacred mound of the people or something, you know, like whatever. It's just like some small like burial mound or something. So they're like, this had some purpose. And this illustrates like the multi-layered thing of the witness. So I'm kind of getting off topic and talking about all kinds of stuff.
It used to be like a silo.
Yeah, it used to be like, who knows? Yeah. I don't know, some weird ancient thing. And then it was built up into a windmill by the medieval people here who used it to like grind grain and stuff. Nowadays, this looks like an electric motor up there. So it's maybe been like retrofitted or replaced, but it's obviously a medieval windmill because it's made out of stones and stuff, and it has a little window up top. And then another modern element is this was part of the medieval or maybe even the ancient burial mound thing, but then there's a floor here that has been like drilled through by the most recent modern folks of the Witness Island,
Right,
and they put their modern wood kind of scaffolding-y architecture here, and then just like started tunneling and like doing all their weird tunneling underground bonus cave area stuff. But then look at this, they hit the ancient world. This column was here before. This was like part of the ancient people's stuff. And then this wood is like modern people stuff. Obviously the lights have been installed here. But this whole corridor has like ancient stuff, you know, so this was like all ancient civilization connecting from the like temple complex, like pyramid tomb thing over there.
You can go
down
in there
this,
and look up, and those are the little squares.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. Yeah, too bright to see the laser. But
there's a point there's not more sand like piling in and like flowing across.
Yeah, so this is kind of that spiritual axis they were talking about, right? So there's that, then there's this area which is like near the windmill, and I don't know what, I mean, except this is like related to the ending of the game and stuff. And then goes straight through to where it ended, presumably. There's tunnels coming off of here, but they're all, you know, they don't have this tile. Yeah, they're all like modern train track tiles. And comes into this zone, which really reminds me of the kind of circular architecture here. I mean, obviously it's circular, but reminds me of kind of reminds me of the Pantheon in Rome with the like the sun coming through. Dome. Yeah, almost looks like they're meant to, again, like sun tracking, like they might be tracking the shadow and stuff over time. And then of course relates to the Secret of Psalm 46 thing and the eclipse themes to have this kind of like, I mean, it looks like a sun from above, and then it looks black and dark from, you know, if you're on the top looking in.
And the sun casting the sun-shaped light
yeah.
shadow?
Yeah, exactly, yeah. Like spot beam. Yeah, and the other thing this reminds me of is those like Native American religious spaces, the kivas, I think they were called, where it was like a men's like cylinder like sunk into the earth, and you kind of walk down, almost like a jacuzzi shape, but much deeper, with kind of like a bench, or circular bench around the side, and it was kind of like a discussion space for the men, with like talk about politics and make decisions, and also like do religious stuff and do like I don't know, like tobacco type like drug ceremonies and things. So that always just, I don't know why it's so cool to me, but just the structure of the kiva and the idea of a religious space being like sunk into the earth rather than like a big soaring cathedral just seems really interesting.
Very unique space.
Yeah, so that's all that we have architecturally of the civilization, and the detail from the I talked about how they did like hunter gathering on the bays, and maybe kept some creatures like goats and stuff.
Yeah, so did they build this kind of ruins of the agricultural areas? I think that's
later. This says like, oh, some evidence is visible, but I don't see any evidence of that. Everything I see from later on seems to be from the medieval area, because it all seems to be agriculture. It doesn't seem to be like pasture. I mean, like, what does pasture look like? Just grass or something? I don't know. Yeah, yeah, so that's the ancient civilization. They... I mean, one thing that's interesting about the civilization and distinguishes it from the more recent two, a very light presence, and that extends to the audio logs and stuff. We don't actually have any sayings from the people of this time. It's prehistoric, right? This is like nomadic-ish hunter-gatherer / maybe they do a little bit of animal husbandry. They don't fully live in cities yet. Like, they're just starting to, kind of. Like, maybe they congregate here for certain parts of the year to do their trade, but then they spread out again to, like, the two different sides of the bay or something. Again, everything in the Witness is compressed geographically.
Yeah, if they actually lived here, like, across the island and not just in the desert, then for all we know, they had, like, a bunch of, like, wooden houses that are all gone.
Yeah, little huts and things, you know. Yeah. And so it's like prehistoric, so we don't have their writing or anything, and they can't speak for themselves, just like how the prehistoric peoples, I mean, we can go and interview like tribe, like hunter-gatherer people today, and we can kind of extrapolate and be like, well, they were probably similar to the people who lived in, like, you know, the Near East like 10,000 years ago, in terms of culture and stuff, but it's just you know, it's this prehistorical people, you know, tying in with the ideas of it being kind of like the first stirrings of consciousness. And And so the audio logs that we have that are like related to them are not actually, they're not getting to speak for themselves. It's people speculating about like what must it have been like. Like this audio log here, I think it's pretty short, so maybe we'll just play it again. It's like imagining like who were those first scientists who, you know, had the temerity to try and understand the natural world or something.
I maintain that the cosmic religious feeling is the strongest and noblest motive for scientific research. Only those who realize the immense efforts and, above all, the devotion without which pioneer work in theoretical science cannot be achieved are able to grasp the strength of the emotion out of which alone such work, remote as it is from the immediate realities of life, can issue. What a deep conviction of the rationality of the universe, and what a yearning to understand, were it but a feeble reflection of the mind revealed in this world, Kepler and Newton must have had to enable them to spend years of solitary labor in disentangling the principles of celestial mechanics. Those whose acquaintance with scientific research is derived chiefly from its practical results easily develop a completely false notion of the mentality of the men who, surrounded by a skeptical world, have shown the way to kindred spirits scattered wide through the world and through the centuries. Only one who has devoted his life to similar ends can have a vivid realization of what has inspired these men and given them the strength to remain true to their purpose in spite of countless failures. It is cosmic religious feeling that gives a man such strength. A contemporary has said, not unjustly, that in this materialistic age of ours, the serious scientific workers are the only profoundly religious people. Albert Einstein, 1930.
Yeah, so, I mean, as you can see, in, you know, this civilization on the Witness, as with all prehistoric civilization, kind of becomes just like a canvas for our own ideas about like what's the natural state of man, you know, or like what must it have been like to be in those early days when we didn't know anything about the world, or like theories about psychological development, like did consciousness arise because we started using language, or like, you know, what about tool use, or, you know, maybe the first cities were they ruled by, you know, god, emperor, kings, or like, you know, were some of them more egalitarian, or you know, how did they build those pyramids, or what did they believe in, or like all these theories, like Nietzsche's theories about like, well, the first morality would have been just good versus bad, you know, and then you had this overturned by slave morality, and then we believed in good and evil. People have had all these ideas, but because we don't have the actual, you know, we can't talk to them, and they didn't leave much writing behind. So it's hard to tell what the real situation was.
Yeah, instead you're like looking at kivas and squinting and going, they must have cared about the sun.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. But yeah, so the most important thing about this, these ancient people, is that they had, just as this audio was describing, a sort of like proto-scientific, proto-religious urge to understand the world and to understand their place in the world. It's like very childlike, very kind of simple, and almost kind of disoriented and lost because they, you know, they know so little. So it's all these sands and things, like it's these people are more, we almost just know them through our own theories about stuff, and they don't have that much to contribute to the ongoing progress. But it's so fun and mind expanding to imagine like what must it have been like for those earlier humans.
I'm going to contradict and say they don't have that much to contribute, because like going back and imagining like, alternative ways of stuff is still contributes a little.
Yeah. But we're not like literally learning from their stuff or whatnot, you know. And so that's why I think, I mean, again, I talk about this in my episode 4. That's why I think this Feynman vault is here, is because if you listen to that video, he has this very strong philosophy of just like doubt and curiosity, and like I'm just trying to find out things about the world, and it's very pure in a way. It's kind of like almost like a little sort of like hardcore materialist or something, but it's this sort of same just pure curiosity, and it's right here, right as the island is like falling into the sea, and you know, very distant from all this other stuff, because I think this is like a starting point. Like this almost looks like would be a more logical place than the intro castle to like come tumbling out of the like weird time warp tunnel.
Right.
So this is like these people had a kind of first inkling and striving for like things that they didn't quite understand. And you know, the sun symbolizes so much in the Witness. It symbolizes like this kind of transcendent unity of everything that the game is always trying to get to. So, and it's also, I mean, obviously it's like life-giving. And in thought experiments like the famous like Plato's allegory of the cave, right? It's totally like the picture over here where Plato is like, oh, like the people are just seeing shadows. The shadows are being cast by a fire, but like even the fire is kind of fake. And like really, if you go outside, then you'll see everything brilliantly illuminated by this sun, and the sun is like God, or like the pure form of the good. It's like radiating these kind of vivifying rays which give reality to everything. So it's sort of like everything is in the mind of God. Everything only exists because the rays are coming from the sun. Nicholas of Cusa, in his audio log over there that I love, where he's like visible, invisible, visible, is talking about light, and he says things like, you know, he's like, I can never see you, God, but in every act of seeing, like, there you are, because it's like by making something exist, you know, it's like that's evidence of you. And it's like whatever force is just like bringing existence to the universe, it's like everywhere, even though I can't see that force. In the same way that the light from the sun is like bouncing off and illuminating everything and kind of making it real. So that's, I don't know, it's like from the very start, the people are like on the right track. This is why they changed from having like a wacky volcano cult where they're like throwing the daughter into the fire or something, to the sun thing. Because it's like from the start, like they kind of know what the target is, even though they've got 10,000 years to go, and they're making incredibly slow progress because it's just so difficult to get off the ground in those early days. Oh, look, here's the three little columns here that matches the side. So, anyways, but yeah.
No, you need these people to ask those first questions and to just be like, what are we doing? Like, how does it work?
Yeah, so that's the very first civilization of the island. And now we get to talk about a much more in evidence group, which is this medieval era people who built the town. They built the windmill. They built the castle, the kind of fantasy castle over there. They built like the scary combat castle over there. They built all these little like ruins of things. Were also a larger town once upon a time that has since eroded away. Yeah, they built the Zen monastery. And they did agriculture, right? They're agricultural civilization. So out here they have they got like olive groves, they got apples. You can see that the land has been kind of piled up little rock walls and stuff. These aren't like building walls because they just continue and they come off at random angles and stuff. These were like the classic thing where there's a bunch of rocks in the field. You want to be able to plow the field, then so slowly you move the rocks to the side and you make a little rock wall, and then you also like thereby establish the boundaries of your property and stuff. So they got some industrial stuff here brought in by the more modern people, but anyways, we got olive groves. We got like whatever these fields are. So we've gone from hunter-gatherer to agricultural people, and then we're going to go to like industrial age the next, which are sort of three big, it's not just different ways of getting food or whatever, it's like different really fundamental economic shifts, and shifted also like the growth rate of the society. I don't know, when you read all this big picture stuff from like Guns, Germs, and Steel or Why the Rest Rules, or also like wacky rationalists like Robin Hanson, they talk about like farmers versus foragers as having different value systems. You know, once you're farming, you don't need to know as much about the world, so in a certain way you're like more ignorant, you're like less well fed because you're just eating freaking greens for all your calories, but you're also inheritance becomes really important because having land is like basically determines where you are in society. You can have wealth build up in ways that you can't when you're just like a hunter-gatherer society that's always on the move.
Dude, I'm tripping out right now because I'm thinking about how if you're agrarian, then you're staying in one place. You literally have to act more like a tree where you follow these like rules that are steady and like will last you over all of the like random catastrophes. But if you're a hunter-gatherer, like you just, if there's a catastrophe, you can just move on. So you're literally more like an animal. So totally different cultures, different lifestyles, right? Like marriage becomes like super intense. You get like less egalitarian, right? Like kind of like less women's rights and stuff, because you're really paying attention to like having a family line and like, you know, passing down the land and stuff, and you don't want to split up the land among multiple descendants, versus hunter-gatherer land. Not as big of a deal to have like lifelong monogamy partner, you know, like you still, the mom has to look after the child, but there's less focus on like property, versus that becomes like an overriding concern in farmer cultures. And then in industrial cultures it becomes less important again because you can more like earn a wage by doing work. Anyways, this is kind of off topic, but so these medieval people are also interesting because they have a great diversity, and we can hear their voices, right? Like we have like all these Nicholas of Cusa quotes. I'll just play this short, wacky, incomprehensible one about a clock. And where is it? It's forward.
Yeah, here we go.
The concept of a clock enfolds all succession in time. In the concept, the 6th hour is not earlier than the 7th or 8th, although the clock never strikes the hour, save when the concept biddeth. Nicholas of Cusa, 1450.
Yeah, so this is like 1400s. We got like Zen masters from back in the day. So these people can speak for themselves. They've got writing, they've got real history, they have diversity, right? There's Christians, there's like Christians of all different types. There's quotes from like all the major religious traditions. There's Sufi quotes in that Nefari person from the mangrove area is Sufi. We got quotes over here. One of them is Taoist, and another is like kind of like Arabic, kind of like Persian or Islamic, I guess. So there's the structure of like the town, right? Like a society, and there's the different hub areas, and then everyone's coming together into the town to like exchange. There's like economic specialization is happening, but also there's all these different perspectives. And we get different like classes and stuff. Like on the inside of the castle, we see the statues of like kings and queens and stuff.
Right, the separation of society and different roles.
Yeah, and the people in the castle are interestingly done in a kind of anachronistic. Like they have these little contradictions. Like they'll be, you know, holding a sword like the gladiators, but then you look closer and they have fencing masks like modern people do. Or, you know, this guy's like playing a guitar. He's like a court jester or, you know, musician or bard or something, but he has like modern equipment. You know, people are dressed in a kind of mishmash of like, you know, ancient queen stuff, but then like high heels. And so there's sort of, these guys have like
sunglasses,
FBI stuff, but then they're carrying swords. So this is done in a sort of like timeless way to illustrate like, well, you know, these things have always been like these class divisions are really not so new, or also, you know, like it's similar now as it's always been. Like this isn't just some historical thing that we've grown out of, like feudalism. It's also not some new oppression, like, oh, capitalism did this, you know. It's like, no, people have always had different status hierarchies and roles in society and stuff like that, and there's always been stuff that's dumb about it. But still, this, you know, this castle area is that's communicating a bit of like there's a complex multi-layered society and stuff. And there's people who are living in the town doing like business and stuff, and then there's people who go off to the monastery and study alone. So I realized I forgot to read the bit from the architecture studio. This is how they describe the kind of second level of civilization. Later, the island's culture and tectonics developed rapidly through the introduction of new technologies and exposure to foreign intellectual societies by way of naval maritime trade. The economic and substantive heart of the island moved inland, where an elaborate water management system came to form with dams, reservoirs, irrigation channels, and agricultural terraces. The primary settlement transformed into a feudal state with a walled town and keep that oversaw the society. So again, this is early concept art, and then the actual gameplay distorted that. So like the walled town and keep just became this thing, which is separate. Like the town is not walled. This is not connected to the thing. Yeah, the primary settlement transformed to feudal state. The focus of islanders' spiritual practices transitioned toward management of life-giving resources such as water, and as gatekeeper to the mystic powers of the volcano. Again, since the early draft of this was written, I'm pretty sure that they moved away from emphasizing the volcano religion aspect of this, because they wanted to tie in more real religions, and the ancient people became sun worshippers. It's interesting just to see the Witness try to do justice to the depth of thought that all these people had, that Nicholas of Cusa and the Zen and Taoist and Islamic people, and you know, like it's trying to say like these were real folks, they were smart people, they've been thinking about some of these deep questions for a long time and in a different way than we do today, and that has a lot of value. And they were in conversation with each other, about some of these big questions. It also, I mean, so to me, or I guess one other thing that I'd say is like, it seems like, well, people were coming to the island, right? Like they were trading and stuff. It's not like there was just this ancient civilization and then it magically developed every religion on Earth, like a game of Civ 4 when you're way out in front or something. Like people were like coming to this harbor thing. This is like built out of concrete or whatever, like this structure, but this is a bunch of stone, which I guess has had concrete like awkwardly plastered on top of it. That's kind of funny.
We gotta have those ship makers.
Yeah.
Actually, wait a sec. Can you look back? I was wondering if those are like the modern ship acres, right?
Yeah.
Maybe I saw some wood.
Oh, no,
Okay.
I don't think so, because they just had little, they would like park the ships in the harbor and then do little rowboat stuff to them or something. I don't know. Yeah. Yeah, so it's like there's more like commerce and exchange happening. There's like real diversity happening. The little civilization that just had this proto-urge has now developed into many different directions and perspectives, and the kind of full philosophical complexity of the island and of the game's themes is in full swing. Most of the areas of the island are like basically medieval people or at least half of them. Mm-hmm. So that's pretty cool. And you see the different things that they were doing, like where they were getting the wood, where they were getting the stone and stuff, and carving the statues and milling the grain. So that's all cool. I guess another thing, something that I'll talk more about the pros and cons when we get to the industrial civilization, but one of the things that the medieval era civilization has going for it is that it seems like, it's hard to tell if this is just selection effect, and I'm also talking about real history here, but it seems sometimes that at least some of these smart writers and stuff had more of a sense of like being in history and like participating in the great conversations or being part of an intergenerational project than we do today, which is almost maybe like, because progress is slow, like you're like not making much progress towards understanding the fundamental things of the universe. So people are thinking more about this is almost like Baumol's cost disease for philosophy, where it's like if you could either think about the problems of metaphysics or think about the problems of physics, and it's 1700 or like 1200, like they're both incredibly hard. So you might as well think about God, versus like once like Newton gets going and stuff, and then we have like particle accelerators, and it becomes like you can really make a lot of progress in physics, then it's like people will neglect metaphysics because it's like, well, look, this other area is so much more tractable, you know? So people almost kind of like rationally were maybe thinking about things that we neglect now just because the opportunity cost today. It's like, well, I can make so much more progress understanding like the neurology of how the brain interprets color, and like maybe that'll help with understanding consciousness compared to like doing a bunch of meditation and trying to introspect about how each thought succeeds the next, and then, you know, what happens to attention and blah blah blah. So there's almost, I mean, there's like economic versions of this in a way, like you know, it's almost like interest rates were lower in the past, which is not true. Like literal interest rates were very high because everyone was dying all the time, and like people didn't pay each other back, and everyone was poor. But in a certain sense, like if you built a cathedral, like you could build a shitty cathedral out of wood and then just have people in it. You know, it wouldn't look very impressive, but you could have done it. And a lot of people, I'm sure, built houses out of wood back in medieval times. But it's like, it's kind of like, well, if the city's going to be the same size for the next 400 years, you might as well build a cathedral that's going to last for that 400 years. Like it might cost 5 times as much, but it'll last 10 times as long. And like, that's basically going to be a win if you're in a world of like flat economic growth. In a certain sense, it's like 0% interest rates. Like you have like no future discounting, because it's like that church is going to be there. And like 200 years from now, peasants are going to be doing the same stuff.
Right. Like former generations are still going to be here.
Yeah. Versus in the modern day, things are like changing so fast that it would be like economically crazy to be like, I'm going to build a strip mall out of marble to last 1,000 years. It's like, well, Amazon's going to get invented in 10 years. Or like the city's going to get bigger and you're going to want to raise the strip mall to the ground and build like a big apartment tower so that more people can live there. Or, you know, it's almost like
people will just like stop being interested in strip malls for whatever fad reason.
Yeah. It'd be like me being like, you know, I want to build a gaming computer that I can pass on to my children. You know, it's like you'd never do that, because maybe you build a computer with like special components and you put it in a big box and stuff so that it's good for 200 years. You get a really high quality power supply that's never going to go on the fritz. But like the graphics card is going to be outdated in 5 years, so it's not really worthwhile building things to last, precisely because our civilization is so dynamic and there's like more stuff all the time. There's always this next thing. Yeah. So it's like you build the cathedral and it costs 5 times as much, and you're like, oh, it's going to last 10 times as long. But like if GDP is going to double between now and then, you know, you shouldn't have spent all that money in the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, even like architecture or material science, like we're inventing new materials, like that just didn't happen. Like you would have like maybe a different way of making bricks, but like not a whole lot. And
to be clear, I find this kind of annoying, like the fact that this is true. One of my favorite architectural spaces, my number one favorite architectural space in the whole world is the Sagrada Familia Cathedral in Barcelona, which was planned, it's like a huge full-scale like medieval style cathedral, but it was planned in like the 1930s by this visionary architect Antonio Gaudi, or Antonin Gaudi or something. And it's only being completed now, and they're using all these, I mean, it's done in crazy modernistic style with all this mathematical stuff.
Long term, like building over hundreds of years. I'm like, wow.
But also, I mean, it'd be kind of crazy to literally build it with a bunch of like laborers, and so, you know, that illustrates like why we don't have those things today, is because it's just such a waste of time to hire all those people. But they are using a bunch of modern technology to almost like kind of 3D carve the stone columns in the fancy ways that they were designed to be carved and stuff. You know, it's really neat. It's still a lot more expensive than building a normal building, but I kind of wish we could do it more. I'm like, our world is so rich, like, why can't we like 3D print really cool decorations to go on everything, you know?
Just do more long-term stuff.
Yeah. But anyway, so that's all just to say that you should visit the Sagrada Familia Cathedral in Barcelona, and also that, you know, that this medieval world has a kind of different tone. It kind of makes sense in a way that they were thinking more about religion. It makes sense that they more self-consciously were participating in like the great conversations of history and thought of themselves as being like placed in history.
We also, partially because of our modern times and situation, think like, oh, everyone in the past was like just idiots or like had nothing to contribute, and so this game is definitely contradicting that. Like, I definitely remember listening to some of these audiologues and being like, oh, this is like an ancient audiologue or like some random monk. Like, is he really going to have interesting, like, thoughtful opinions that would apply to me today? And I'm like, holy shit, yes.
Yeah. So then another, there's a lot of little like medieval artifacts around here. But I just wanted to note that the monastery here, in my view, in the kind of lore of the game, obviously it has this very Eastern religion flavor to it, with this, you know, very like Buddhist kind of Japanese style architecture in here, and the Zen garden around the side and everything. But in the context of the lore of the game, this is kind of a views that I'll flip-flop back and forth between, because The Witness is a game with a lot of layers. The town is like a kind of economic space and almost a debate space where like lots of different stuff is coming together, and all the other areas of The Witness kind of feel like they're more isolated by comparison. They're people off doing their own thing. But the this monastery almost, and it could be, you know, could have been a Christian monastery if they felt like it. It just wouldn't have looked as cool. Or no, it kind of couldn't be, because it's all about like attention and direct awareness, of which the, you know, Buddhism has just such an advantage over over the Western tradition in. But anyways, in the context of the lore of the game, I feel like this island, this area is almost kind of keeping alive the this sort of sun worshipping religion. Like this is like the sophisticated version after a few hundred years. It feels like it has a direct line of descent, versus this other stuff feels like literal Christians like showed up on a boat and like made Christian architecture and stuff, versus this feels, even though it has all these Eastern vibes, it almost feels like the lore is that like this was like the independent kind of pagan religion of the islands, which used to be sun worshipping, and then slowly became a kind of Platonist, like pure form of the good type thing, and then became like something about, I don't know, about like the environmental puzzles, something, you know, kind of about consciousness and perception and stuff like that, because it has the same icon up here, the same, you know, looking the same as the sun icon on top of the temple. It's also oriented like square onto the sun, I'm pretty sure.
It also has 3 doors on the
Yes,
wall.
that's true. It has the same kind of square type thing and the kind of like step thing
Steps
going
up.
up to it.
Yeah, if you eroded this like a bunch more, then
Yeah.
you might...
Yeah. And then, you know, on the inside, of course, it's kind of like training you. Like this is like the most like tutorially in a way that the environmental puzzles get. I mean, more people probably get the one that's up on the mountain with the panel, but this is almost like a zendo, like a dojo of like learning how to pay attention to your own awareness and like pay attention to the kind of 2D-ness of your perspective. Yeah. So that's kind of interesting to think that this sort of like proto-religious urge.
Have like a model of the model inside the model, right? Like they're still doing
Yes, yeah, exactly. They're still doing like the representation thing. So even though it's obviously drawing on a lot of like Buddhist vibes, I think it also, I guess the fact that it is kind of calling back to the Sun Temple is, to my mind, sort of, it's like they're reminding us that like Buddhism didn't just, I was gonna say didn't just spring out of the head of one man, but like obviously there was the Buddha, but it's like, you know, like people invented Buddhism. Like Buddhism's whole thing is they don't claim to have been like inspired by the Archangel Gabriel or whatever, and then they wrote it all down in a book. Like they were just, you know, Buddha was just out there thinking about life,
really
you know,
hard,
yeah. And it has this big empirical emphasis. And if you go to any like meditation groups today, they'll always talk about your own experience, and you know, they want you to sort of confirm empirically with your own direct.
They want you to think about it.
Yeah,
like, do you find this to be true as well as we?
Yeah, exactly. So that kind of different framing, as opposed to the like revelation-based stuff of Christianity, makes it seem kind of natural and plausible that, as indeed many cultures did, like Gnostic Christianity or like Descartes in Western philosophy, a lot of people eventually coalesced. The Buddhists just did a really great job, but lots of religious and even kind of like scientific materialist, you know, traditions or schools of thought can't have come up with different, you know, have kind of triangulated on similar ideas about the nature of the mind and attention and the kind of hard problem of consciousness or the mind-body problem, things like that. I'm sure I pointed this out before, but of course it's cool that the the monolith bridge is like a single monolithic, or the monastery bridge is like the single monolithic slab, because it's like direct enlightenment. It's like, well, it's like, yeah, it's like the consciousness, it's like so untractable, but it's like all at once. Like the problem is how big and unified it is. That's the kind of knowledge it is.
Yeah,
just like instant realization.
That whole stone down
Yeah,
in one go.
or like solving one of the environmental puzzles. You're just like, wow, oh, there it is.
Yeah,
you know, just one. It's all in one moment. Versus the this like Western style architecture bridge was like built out of a bunch of little stones. Yeah, so it's like, wow, the knowledge comes together. Look, all the stones support each other, and like it's like physics, chemistry, biology. You know, like they all stack up. So anyways, that's the medieval civilization. It's just been like an hour now, so we might just cut it and then post another video soon about the industrial civilization, and then shading into a sort of like, I would say post-industrial, but more like kind of techno-futuristic, like aspirational sci-fi super civilization. But yeah, if you're wondering who is like laying down all the concrete or freaking towing those crates all over the island, then you have modern industrial revolution people to blame. But yeah, so we will see you back for part 2 of Civilizational History of the Witness. Hope you enjoyed this episode.